Did you get a little pop-up, anybody? Because I just hit recording, but it
Nope,
didn't actually give me a pop-up at all. So
it didn't give me a pop up
I
at
do
all.
have the thing beside my screen though, so we're just gonna
So do
trust.
I.
Um,
So this
so
time, if the recall doesn't record now, Dean, we can blame you.
or I'm gonna blame Zoom.
Yeah, so I.
I'm not taking the fall twice on this one. So,
No.
so since we did talk about intake forms quite a bit last time, and I alluded to mine, I posted it in the Discord, and some of you guys even took the time to kind of get into it and fill it out a little bit. I want to show everybody the back end of it just so we can talk about the difference between individual and aggregate data or subjective and objective data and kind of how those things can kind of help us again with everything from individual programming to just marketing to your desired demographic. So we're going to go into that a little bit, probably for like 5 minutes before we jump into the actual identification of task demands section. So bear with me a second on this. Share my screen.
Also, the identification of task demand stuff is where we get start to immediately dive into more of the fun stuff. Because like the intake stuff always seems like it's kind of basic, and all of you guys already know how to do intakes. But we want to give you guys a lot more context into all this stuff, and the intake is the most vital piece to get to all of the task demand things.
The intake is often overlooked but incredibly
Yes,
important. Is
yes.
how we describe it here. So let me clear the participants box and everything to my other screen. All right. So as we mentioned last time, you guys have any questions, drop them in the chat and we will get to them. You guys should be able to see my intake here. As you can see, it's 4 sections, a whole lot of just individual information here. But this is what I'm even talking about with like objective questions where we have categorizations that people can just check off, right? And then we've got a whole lot of please explains. And this is where I get the individualized subjective answers. So that's pretty much how this entire thing is set up. You'll see a whole lot of checkboxes and then a lot of please explains, things of that nature. So when I get on the back end and I look at responses, and you can see I've got a pretty decent sized cohort here. This is where, if it'll load, get past all the birthdays here. Get past this. This is where I can actually get to some graphing where I can see like exactly why people might be coming to me for training, right? So strength, 84% of the participants that have filled this out have come to me for strength work, body composition, capacity. Those are kind of my 3 highest by a pretty substantial margin, right? So if I'm looking at finding ways to market myself to more clientele similar to the ones that I have, these are things that I'm probably going to be talking about a lot through social media, through our newsletters, and any other marketing that we actually do, right? So this is the kind of stuff where you can look through this and get a better understanding of not just like what you're providing, but how you're actually perceived by the people that are following your work, right? Or in the gym, watching you train other people and watching you interact, maybe even watching you train yourself, if you're working out on the gym floor. So this is super useful information to me. Conversely, if I am somebody that's like, hey, I want to be in the post rehabilitation, bridging world, right? I only got 32.7% of the people that have filled this out have clicked on that box, right? So if that's something that I want to be a higher focus or a higher prioritization with my demographic, I probably need to gear a lot more of my content towards that or my communication towards that. Same thing with, if I was looking at weight loss or something of that nature, right? So what you see here are the other category where people can fill out one-off answers essentially. So these are all just one-off answers. These would be more individual data. Same thing. This is where we get into the subjective answer, where I've got 107 answers, and I can go through again, look at these things individually instead of in all. But that's where I can kind of look through from that perspective. Same thing, lifestyle considerations, and then there's a few other ways this maps it out as far as get a lot of like pie charts, things of this nature, depending on how I actually set up and place the questionnaire. Same thing here. The majority, 2/3 of the people that come to me train 5 to 7 days a week or would like to train 5 to 7 days a week. So high frequency clientele, people who are probably prioritizing fitness pretty highly in their lives at that point, which makes sense based on how I market my services and the people that I'm looking to train, right? So that's another thing that kind of tells me like I'm probably in the right place for some of this. Current fitness level, I get a lot of sevens. Goal fitness levels, I get a lot of nines and tens. So 6 and 7s to nines and tens. Again, just kind of putting a proxy or a marker to current level of training to ideal or desired level of training. Same thing here. 70% of the people that have filled this out have worked with the trainer before. That's a valuable piece of data in my eyes that it allows me to better understand probably the training age and training history of the people that are coming to me. It also opens up some questions of, why aren't you working with your last trainer? Right? What happened? What went wrong? Did anything go wrong? Are you just somebody who, I get a lot of coaches who have worked with 10, 15, 20 trainers over the last, 5, 6, 7 years. And they're just looking at, getting a better understanding of how people program and what their training style looks like. So it's almost an education process too. So that's where for me, I'm not going to go through the whole thing for you guys. I'll spare you that. But that's where, like, for me, if I'm looking at these two types of data samples or data sets, I can kind of look at just getting better responses and setting up my actual intake form to generate better responses and more information for me for future programming and marketing. Does that make sense to everybody? Everybody feels good about that? Any questions about that? I can only see like 3 of you, so you'll have to type in the chat box if so. And one of the ones I can see is Dean's note taker screen. It's taking up valuable real estate on the right side of this. So if there's no additional questions for that, I'm gonna go ahead and get to the actual presentation. We'll talk task demands. That pop back up, Matt. That switch over.
Yep, you're good.
Okay. Sometimes the screen sharing thing's a little funky. So we talked about a lot as far as the actual intake process and the goal selection process, types of goals on Wednesday. Now we're going to look at better understanding the identification of task demands, which I mean, I think Matt would agree with me. This is outside of the intake form. Like, this is the next most important part because this is going to shape what all of your testing and all of your training actually looks like. Right.
Yep.
So we kind of look at 4 categories here. And some are prioritized a little more than others, depending on who we're working with. But we've got movement demands, we've got physical and physiological demands, skill demands, and then cognitive and psychological demands. And these, again, based on who we're talking with, they will be prioritized a little differently. If I'm working with somebody who, again, like one of Matt's clients, for instance, where they've got very strict technique demands, like the movement demands come into play, right? We need to make sure that the people can access the ranges of motion that their sport actually involves. If I've got somebody who's more of like a dynamic field sport athlete or something like that, it's not as important unless I view like them not being able to access a specific range of motion being a limiter in their ability to produce or decelerate force, change of direction, or whatever. Right. So again, these are things that we're looking at. These are things that we can build assessments around. Same thing with physical, physiological, skill, and cognitive. We'll kind of go through these one by one here. Anything to add to that, Matt, before we break into them?
Yeah, just remember that these are in no particular order, and they're also not a set in stone thing. So, well, they are. These are kind of like a set in stone thing, but they're a slider bar, right? So it's not really like a yes or no category. You will have some things that are going to be physiological demands that also fall within the movement demands category because you have to develop those movement demands via physiological things. You'll have movement demand things that are developed through training skill, right? You'll have movement demands that are developed through cognitive and psychological demands of that individual sport through like training for increased confidence and different things like that for different ranges of motion and things that you'll cover. So all of these will kind of blend together. We're just looking at what we perceive as the individual limiter for that specific task demand that we can then work on improving. And we're going to touch all of those things as we go through a training program. We're just trying to figure out which one is going to be the priority first and which one is going to be the rock that we're identifying as the limiting factor.
Yeah, and that's something I'm going to touch on that a little bit on the next slide as we get into the movement category, because that's something that we talk about a lot, but honestly, like it it's the biomechanic people on the internet don't want to hear it, but the majority of like biomechanical issues or limitations that we see and we have seen, throughout our careers are due to strength and capacity limiters, right? When you've got somebody that's performing a movement screen and or sometimes even just novelty issues and
Yeah.
they have a like say a quote unquote very squatty squat and they have trouble accessing certain ranges of motion. They're not getting into a lot of knee flexion. They're not being able to get their maintain their center of mass, whatever. They're not getting depth per se. And then you put them on their back and tell them to pull their knees to their chest and they have full range of motion with that. Like that's not a biomechanics issue. That's a strength and stability issue. That's them not being able to manage their center of mass, which isn't an actual range of motion limitation. That's just what you're seeing as the symptom. Like there's a deeper cause to that that we have to figure out, right? And that's where, for us, if we're looking at like biomechanics issues and it's not like a clear mechanical stoppage or something of that nature, that means it's probably trainable in a way, and we can find a way to access that range of motion through loading, through load placement, against center mass work, and or just through higher or lower constraints, based on exercise selection. So there's a lot of things that we can look at from that perspective, a lot of things that we can train. But what like we're probably not going to do with a lot of people is just have them sit on the ground and do a lot of mobility and like range of motion based work. Like we're going to find a way to make that trainable typically. Just
So
using the
remember, one of the things that we have kind of argued with people about, and this is something that I got from personally from FRC back in like 2012, 2013. Um, the only way to overwrite a faulty movement pattern is with a greater stimulus, right? So we're not going to overwrite and over correct or correct something by making it super low intensity. So if somebody has that small or that range of motion issue or anything like that, that is going to be their dominant neural pattern as soon as things start getting higher and more intense, right? Because if you look at the way that that goes, it's like any sort of energy system, right? The more complex that pathway is to complete, the less likely that is to be completed under high levels of strain. So with that motor pattern becoming shorter and shorter, the only way that we can really like elicit long-term change with that is to give it some kind of a stimulus that exceeds the previous one. So, for example, if somebody's like not able to squat to depth body weight, but we can get them to hack squat to like full range of motion, I'm going to train them on that as much as I possibly can because I'm going to then start to overwrite their squat position with that movement and give them the ability to really just express that later on because they will have changed that faulty movement pattern with a more effective one.
Yeah. Yeah, Diego in the chat, it's like doing a reset when you have to put 600 pounds on your back.
Yeah, it's never going to happen.
This is something that back in my more confrontational days on the internet a few years ago, like I got into it with somebody on, on the post of theirs where they were working with someone who's literally an 800-pound squatter, having them do like Dow squats. And they were showing like, they were using body weight squats to validate the actual results they were getting, and the drills that they were having this person use. And the reality of it is like there couldn't be anything much more different than a body weight squat and an 800-pound squat, right? When you're looking at like, and this is why we have kinematics and kinetics up here, right? And that's we're looking at movement without force or without load, without tolerance, and then we're looking at movement demands with force, tolerance, whatever. And those are two very different things, and the body is going to self-organize around those things very differently, right? So looking at movement outside of the task is fine because you can get some things that might like initially show you some pretty big red flags, but at the same time, like I always want to see how somebody moves while they're actually exercising.
Yep.
Like that's why we put so much focus on the actual training block and not just doing an assessment, right? So I kind of outlined this on Wednesday. Like I do, Matt and I, this is where Matt and I again differ based on the people that we're working with, and we'll go through kind of each of our like movement assessments and what we have people do. But I do have people submit videos for a bodyweight squat. I do have people submit videos for a standing toe touch, a push up, an Apley scratch test, again, bilateral asymmetries, whatever. Looking at rib cage rotation, scapulohumeral rhythm, whatever, in different positions. and then a gait test. And these things for me are not all inclusive or conclusive by any means, but they do give me a little bit of an idea of what I might see under load, right? It just gives me a little head start or a little sneak peek sometimes. But I definitely don't take those things as uh, being kind of exclusion based, right? Where it's like if I see somebody doing they come to me with a hingy squat, that doesn't mean we're not going to squat. That just kind of tells me maybe the type of squat that we're going to use, right? Like Matt said, even like a hack squat, earlier, like I'm probably just going to front load that person. Or if I have the actual equipment available, like I'll have them do something like a hack squat where it's just highly constrained. It keeps them into place and allows them to move through the lower body range of motion that I'm looking for. Right. So we use these things again to find better solutions rather than excluding whole bases of exercise. Like no one has to earn the right to do specific things based on the model that we're doing. We're just going to find the most efficient and most effective way to progress them through that.
Yeah.
And, as someone who worked in a box gym for a long time, 13 years of my career, like there's nothing more frustrating to me than watching coaches have clients like struggling to goblet squat 15, 20-pound dumbbells when they're standing right next to a fucking leg press or a hack squat or something of that nature, where that person can be building a whole lot of capacity and a whole lot of actual like just better tissue tolerance, doing something way more effective just because they want them to be able to squat upright in their first couple of weeks of training.
Yeah.
Like pick the thing that's progressible. And a lot.
This is one of the reasons why we've moved from coaching exercises and movements to coaching off of adaptation individually, because that allows you so much more programmatic freedom to really do whatever it is that's going to be best for the individual in front of you. Because if you're looking at somebody who, like we looked at on the previous slide, where we were talking about things like physiological demands, if we're looking at somebody who has a neurological limitation with their sport or whatever it is that they're doing, or their goal is more neurologically based, well, okay, cool. I can do some ascending load leg press sets really, really easily and get them working on that neurological system and working on increased high threshold motor neuron recruitment in their quads and in their lower body system much easier than I can by just making them learn how to squat, especially if there's somebody who's fairly new to all this stuff. So it allows you to select significantly better protocols for somebody to outline a better program.
Especially when you're dealing with time limitations, right? Again, if we're working with somebody for
An hour.
like
yeah,
most of us do in this industry,
you really got like 45 minutes because they're always going to show up late and they're going to want to leave a little early.
Up and talk, but and you see that person twice a week typically,
yeah.
Right? Especially if we're working with general population clients, it's at that point, getting work done is often a way higher return on investment than like trying to teach things early on. Sometimes you just got to get in and get the work done and build a foundation that allows for more effective and more efficient teaching down the road, whether that means 3 or 4 weeks from now or 6 months from now. Sometimes it's easier just to build like some of that, looking at the difference between inter and intramuscular coordination, looking at the things of, tissue quality, whatever, building capacity. Like sometimes you're going to get a lot farther just getting that person to work hard in the most direct way possible early on. And then the teaching is much easier down the road once they build a little bit more of that coordination and probably better movement just through increased strength, right? The majority of us work with a very undertrained population, and their biggest limiter in most things is their inability to resist force, whether that be gravity or fatigue or load. So building up tolerance with that is going to get you pretty far most of the time. So again, we say, biomechanics, this is where you based on my exercises, they're very general pattern based things. Like I'm just looking at general global patterns, for the most part. Matt might be looking at something different based on his demographic, right? So again, I think this is where you guys can pick movements that are going to portray what, your typical clients need to be able to do a little better. It might be very similar. It might be the same thing. It might be a little bit different, and that's okay. Like, we want your actual assessment process to be individualized, right? Or at least individualized to the demographic that you work with. So again, don't just take it and look at ours as like kind of the end all be all.
Yeah. The only thing that I would add and change to this one for myself is instead of positions and postures, I look at inter and intramuscular coordination, which is something that Kyle referenced earlier. So intermuscular coordination is going to be defined at how well your muscular systems work together in coordination to complete a given task. And intermuscular is going to be how well the individual muscular system works together to complete a specific task, right? So if I'm looking at intramuscular, like an area that I could look at um assessing an intermuscular coordination deficit is watching how somebody sequences a squat or a deadlift, right? So watching their movement sequence on the execution on the concentric portion of that is a really easy way for me to see if they've got a high degree of intermuscular coordination. If they don't, then I can start working on that, and I can improve that through intramuscular coordination by working on some neurological qualities with that specific muscular system that I see as the limiter, as the thing that's breaking down in that movement. So that's the only thing I would end up adding and changing to that. Because for me, the position and posture is going to be dictated by whatever is the most effective and efficient for the movement. So I remove that one entirely.
Well, yeah, I mean, we agree on that.
Yep.
That's the way I meant that. But yeah, so
That's what I'm saying is like you said, that's the only difference. Yeah.
so getting into physical and physiological demands, like this is looking at everything from fatigue resistance to force and velocity profiles, their ability to manage intensity at different levels, both from a pure force perspective and a velocity perspective, and then everything in between. And then, like I said, kind of the same thing. We look at kinetics and kinematics here as well, as far as just looking at, okay, what's that movement actually look like now under load or just under stress in general? Because that might also be velocity, right? From that perspective, that might be deceleration versus acceleration. So, again, this is where now we're looking at these things under load, and then from a bioenergetics and substrate perspective, under varying levels of intensity and fatigue accumulation over the course of different durations of exercise and different levels of both heart rate profiles, and like we use max wattage for a lot of things as we get in the assessment profile as well. So that's going to be on another call. But looking at this, looking at how well they go through, again, creatine based work, glycolytic based work, and then oxidative at a few different levels, just to get a better idea of where they profile there and what their skill and ability is in those realms. And not everybody needs everything is another thing that we kind of look at there too. So we kind of pick and choose a little bit there. Anything to add there, Matt?
For my demographic, I use a lot less substrate utilization because it's all usually going to be anaerobic. I don't care what any powerlifter says about a set of 10 squats. It's not cardiovascular development. We can work on some individual work capacity things and some buffering qualities with that, but we're not going to be working on cardio. So I usually don't use much of that stuff, and I can pretty much assess that all of them have a very low and poor aerobic base. So I can use it, but I'm not going to really work on assessing it.
Yeah. Very fair. You said assuming that power lifters have a poor aerobic base, like
I said I can reasonably assume,
that's a gross generalization, Matt.
and it's a true one,
gonna make people mad,
and it's accurate.
So this is where like the enter and intro kind of fits for me as well. Like I almost put that
Yep.
a little bit more into skill demands, but like Matt said, there's a lot of overlap here, and we kind of look at things a little bit differently, and you guys will see that as we get into programming and vertical and horizontal integrations as well. And I think it's important for you guys to see that Matt and I do things very differently, even though, we're obviously on the same team and we agree a lot from a principle perspective. Our application process is very different from one another, just based on the people that we work with and what type of programming and even testing and assessing is going to be the most effective with them. So I think it's actually a great example, and should at least raise some general awareness that there's no one right way to apply these things. It's just whatever application works the best for you all based on the people that you're working with. We're very principle based, and then everything kind of again expands out from that perspective. And you'll see some things that we do that are very similar, but you also see a lot of things that are very different. And there's reasons why and behind that, and we're happy to discuss those in more depth. We try to discuss them as much as we can. So
The nice thing about this being super principle based, like Kyle was talking about, sorry to just interject really quick, but The nicest part about this being really principle based when we get to vertical and horizontal programming and the differences between the two, what you guys will notice is that as you get better at those, your principles will be able to apply to each one of them, and you can very easily switch between programs and goals, right? So this makes it super scalable, and makes it really easy for you to reach a much broader variety of clients because Kyle is now capable. Kyle can do my vertical, like horizontal style
Yeah.
programming like I do for a person who's looking to get super strong and doesn't really care about cardio, but prefers to work with him over me. And I can do vertical style programming for somebody who doesn't really care about getting like unbelievably peak strong and wants to be a significantly more well-rounded athlete, but prefers to work with me over Kyle. So it gives you guys a lot more ground to cover with your clients, particularly if they start to switch goals or sports or seasons of training.
Well, and it just even phases, right? Like a
Yeah.
lot of, and we'll get in, this is more of a lead in to probably a couple weeks from now, but
Yeah.
a lot of my accumulation phases or off season accumulation phases for clients are more horizontally integrated. Whereas when I get into intensification phases or metabolic phases, that's where I'm more concerned about consolidation of stressors and more vertical integration. So even looking at the differences in phase selection and based on how you kind of set up sessions and then set up weeks, those things change as well. So you might see one client go through three different phases and they go from a vertical integration into a horizontal integration into a vertical integration again.
Yep.
And that's perfectly fine. That's just picking the best tool for the job, the
Yep.
most efficient way to kind of go about it. So
I actually just swapped a client from one to the other because he decided he didn't want to do another meet for the
yeah,
foreseeable future and wants to work on cardio. So we just switched from horizontal to vertical.
yeah, and training frequency, like you might have somebody that in the off season trains 5 days a week and in the in season trains two, right? So
Yep.
one of those makes better sense for them based on what they're doing and what their other activities are. So again, all of this stuff is very flexible. It does force you to make decisions, and decisions are hard. Like we don't, it's not a cookie cutter approach. It's something where like you have some concepts, you have some tools, but you guys still at the end of the day have to be the ones to apply these things the most appropriately, right? For the people you're working with. So again, this is where for me, especially like where I see a lot of skill demands. Obviously when I'm working with people in sport, like I need to be able to sure they can perform the skills involved with, soccer, basketball, whatever. That's more so, even though for the actual sport coach, it's more so when I'm working with some of my endurance athletes, like I work with some rowers, I work with quite a few runners, some cyclists. That's where for me, it's making sure that they're able to manage the most efficient technique for those sports. Like, especially when I get into like my rowers, you guys, even if you don't know proper rowing technique, you've been in a gym and you've seen stuff that is not proper rowing
Oh,
technique,
yes.
right? Like that, like there's a lot of ways to fuck up on a rower and
My
be,
favorite is this kind.
yeah, well, it's just like releasing before the pull. Like there's just all kinds of stuff that you see, and there's a lot of there. If you guys have ever been on like an erg or something like that, like it's a flywheel based instrument. Timing, coordination, and technique is extremely important for getting the max out of every pull. It's more than just like pulling hard and pulling as fast as you can. That's how you just burn out in the first 30 seconds of something. So this is something that I work on with a lot of my people in that realm. Same thing with running, working on, again, gait mechanics, working on strides, working on actual contacts per minute. And so these are things that, I will work on with specific athletes based on that. Um, and a lot of it is built on efficiency, and then efficiency is going to lead to better efficacy down the road, right? The more efficient we can become, the better outputs we can eventually become. But that is not always linear. Sometimes getting people more efficient in a skill, like you will see an initial output drop off. And that's something as coaches, like Matt probably sees that in technique wise with a lot of his athletes as well. Like sometimes we have to understand that's going to happen for more long-term growth and more long-term progress, right? Is they might be doing something that works for the now and it works short term, or it works within the level of competition they're in right now. But as soon as they try to progress, either in their sport or in the sport environment, it's no longer going to be super efficient and it doesn't have a lot of longevity. So that's something we also have to forecast a little bit and be able to work with, and kind of nip in the bud before they get too far along from a habits perspective.
Yeah, a lot of that would come down to the individual execution of the movement and the movement sequencing. So that's the easiest thing that we would work on fixing with a demographic that's looking to just get super strong or super jacked. Because again, if they're sequencing and their movement execution is off with that, that's um, probably going to start shunting fatigue to systems that we don't want to fatigue early. And which could be poor exercise selection or it could just be poor coordination. So, looking at that is an easy way that we can start figuring that out too.
Yeah, and I mean, and conversely, like when I have athletes and they don't have a specific conditioning modality that they necessarily need to utilize, and I just want to get the most out of the conditioning, that's where I'll pick something that's very low coordination or low skill demand, like an assault bike, where we can purely focus on outputs. We can focus on high outputs. I can run glycolytic work on it. I can run threshold work on it. I can run oxidative work on it. And there are no skill demands at all involved in that. I can put somebody on an assault bike their first day in a gym and have them go at it and probably be okay. I can have somebody who's been in a gym for 20 years on it and still get a really good session out of it. I've got a client right now that hits 2,600 watts as a max wattage on the assault bike, which if you guys have ever been on assault bike, you know that's absolutely ridiculous. And we still run all of his glycolytic work, his threshold work, and his oxidative work on that same modality as a percentage based thing, right? Like and we'll talk about this more, but we get glyco work in at like repeats of 35 to 40%. We get threshold work in at repeats of 20 to 25, and we get his oxidative stuff in at 10 to 15, depending on duration. And those are his markers to hit. And we just auto regulate it from there. But it's a very trained individual that still gets a lot out of the simplest, most efficient modality possible. There's no reason for me to move him to something else from that perspective. Like he is not, if he hasn't hit his ceiling on it, neither of a lot of other people.
Yeah.
Right. He does break bikes frequently, which is annoying for somebody else who works out in his gym and also likes to use those bikes. Cognitive and psychological demands. So this is something, honestly, some of you might not need to mess with at all or not feel comfortable with. But this might have to do with, specific knowledge of the actual task, like just teaching them what the task is. Like it might be a novelty issue versus a familiarity issue for a lot of people. Tactical and strategic components to the task. Again, like this is going to be stuff that's a little bit more sport specific. But even looking like from a conditioning perspective, a lot of what I work with people is finding appropriate pacing speeds and tempos. And a lot of that is very tactical and strategic because again, it's if you screw up your pacing on glycolytic repeats or threshold work or even oxidative work, you will find yourself in the wrong substrate very quickly, and you're probably not going to perform that actual workout very well. And if that transfers over into a race where you burn yourself too hot early on, you're not going to perform very well in that actual race, right? So again, understanding pacing, that's going to be a tactical strategic component. And then autonomic stress and performance degradation. So again, like this is where we look at people as they get into like high levels of stress and anxiety upwards of a competition and they get hypersympathetic. We will see performance degradation with a lot of people simply because they don't respond to that stress very well. And it ends up limiting their overall outputs, right? So this is something with, whether it's soccer players or basketball players or whatever, as games become more important or as they're getting more playing time or they're getting deeper into a game and their actual play becomes more important, these are things that we also just want to be better aware of. Same thing with any of my endurance athletes. Some of them have a lot of trouble with actual race performance just based on a ton of anxiety. And you see a lot of athletes with this. And again, this is something that might be better off for another profession or professional. But it might also be something that you can kind of work through with just exposures and training sometimes, right? And this, like Matt, like might have something where it's like, people get stressed in meets. He might do like have them, go into and work through like some smaller local meets just to get the experience of going through that process prior to going through a big meet. I
Yep.
might have somebody go through a series of like smaller local 5Ks and 10Ks before they go run their big meet, just so they can go through that process, right? And I think that's something that again you can work into the actual training process, especially from like an LTAD perspective. that'll really help your clients if they're performance based once they get to their actual competition.
I think the one of the things that's um underappreciated about this is the creation of ritual. And the creation of ritual around any kind of task that you're going to be trying to complete or anything that you're going to do that requires a high degree of performance and focus. Um, we did a podcast a while ago with Mike Teixeira, who's a really good powerlifting coach, like the guy that created RPE for lifting. And that was one of the things that we talked about is ritualization and of your setup, and whatever you're going to do to complete something in particular. And I think that's a super unrelated or underappreciated concept, because the better your ritual is and the more you are able to get into that and repeat that, the more likely you are to zone yourself in and get ready for that. So with a lot of people who struggle with something like this, that's the one of the first things that I'm going to start working on with them is having them create a mantra, or having them start doing something like building and focusing on developing a ritual around the successful completion of that given thing.
Oh, I've got an easy example here that I've used with people in the past. Do I have any endurance athletes here, or people who have competed in endurance sports? If
Say
so,
yes in the chat if you are.
say yes in the chat. Adnan, I know you have. I know you're one of them. Is anybody else one? This might apply to your strength sports as well, Matt.
Yeah.
We'll find out in a second. What's the most important part of your pre-competition routine and setup? And this applies to pretty much everybody that I've met that's a human being. Pre-race, especially if we're looking at like endurance athletes. Anybody got guesses?
Taking a crap.
Yes. Taking a shit. I'm not joking, man. Like it sounds funny, but I've had competitors and athletes that I just kind of assumed this was a thing people understood, that got to races and didn't have enough time to find the toilets. And it fucked up their entire race. Fueling's a part of that, Dean, honestly. Finding fuel that doesn't make you shit yourself while you're running is also a good,
That's a big part of it.
like one of the things that I work with a lot of my endurance athletes is like, hey, if you're doing something that requires salts and gels, you need to test those out on your long runs and see how your stomach digests those things prior to the actual race, because you don't want to have to be scrambling and searching for porta potties on the side of the road. Like it sounds funny, but these are like real world things. Like these are logistics you have to figure out if you're doing any kind of endurance athlete. And I could see maybe your athletes dealing with some of the same stuff.
Oh, bracing for a deadlift doesn't
Yeah,
usually end well.
yeah. So it's like these are things where again, like that's a lot of times like that's hypersympathetic activity. Like when you're hypersympathetic, your body will release bowels. Like
Yep.
you see this with animals when they're running from predators. Like this is something where it's like you will have gastric distress the more stressed you get. Like that's part of hypersympathetic. That's an autonomic response that we really can't get around. The only way to really get around it is more exposures to more races, whatever, and planning for it. So now it's like when I make sure I talk to a lot of my competitors and my people who do endurance, especially my endurance athletes, it's like, hey, get where you're going like 90 minutes before the actual start of the race. Make sure you find the facilities, make sure you fuel yourself, and make sure you get in a proper warm up. Don't show up 10 minutes before and get on the starting line.
Yep.
And that sounds obvious, but that's also something that you learn pretty early on, that it's like you need to tell people,
Yep.
because it's like it's a mistake a lot of people make early on, and you do not want to make it twice. Oh yeah, white packs is, yeah, it's like that's part of the strategy. It's like bring everything you think you might need. If you
Yep.
can pack it, bring it. And I think it's funny because people, again, it's just like these are aspects that you don't know them until you've experienced it, but that's a very tactical and strategic aspect of any type of race or competition, right? So again, little stuff like that is stuff that you want to incorporate and you want to
Oh
help
yeah.
your athletes actually plan for. And if it is like performance anxiety, again, that's not that dissimilar from people getting really nervous and anxious for public speaking, right? It's the same response physiologically from an autonomics perspective. It's fight or flight. It's sympathetic tone, hyperactivity. The more exposures they get, the more familiar with that environment they get, the less of a stress reaction they will get over time. So things like, for Matt, like smaller meets building up to a larger meet, if they can fit them in. For any of my endurance athletes, like again, same thing, smaller meets, local meets before they go into like a big one. Anything that gives them a little bit of familiarity and a little bit of experience goes a long way for some of these other things.
Yeah.
So
another pretty common one you'll see is movement. Like Kyle said, with performance degradation, you'll also see movement degradation over time when somebody becomes less confident with the movement. So you guys will see people reducing range of motion in their lifts when the load starts getting heavier. You'll see them starting to change their sprint technique as they start to get higher, like higher velocities if they've been injured sprinting before. So you'll start to worry to see those things as well, and those become another thing that we have to look at assessing and training from a psychological perspective.
Well, and part of a hypersympathetic autonomic response is hypertonicity of tissues.
Yeah.
Right. You will have higher neural engagement, higher muscular tonicity, and typically lower movement options. And that decrease in variability acts as an internal constraint for more motor efficiency, like in a straight line. So if you're doing something dynamic, something that needs like dynamic movement, like you might also lose capacity there as well. Fatigue also does that.
Yep.
Right. That's just like that Jacksonian dissolution. Like the more fatigue, the more stress you're under, the more basic your level of competency becomes and the less variability you typically have. Because variability ends up being a skill that's dropped off. It's just a physical or physiological skill. We see that the same thing with substrate utilization and energy demands from an energetics perspective. Like one of our jokes is under enough fatigue, high stem becomes moderate stem and low stem becomes moderate stem. Everything turns like glycolytic under enough.
Yep.
Right. Enough repeat creatine work, you run out of creatine, you fatigue, you start occluding. Same thing with threshold and oxidative work. Once you get to a certain level of percent heart rate, probably for most people 85 to 90, low 90% max heart rate for a certain amount of time, you are going to start occluding. You are going to start getting into glycolytic system, which is going to quickly turn into lactate threshold, which is going to decrease your performance substantially at that point, right? So fatigue is going to turn everything into moderate stem glycolytic work at some point, right? So that's where, as we get into talking more about conditioning protocols, we'll talk about protocols that work on acid buffering and protocols that work on avoidance of acid production. Those are two different types of training and have two different uses. So that's a few calls away though, but
yeah, we'll get to that.
Yeah, it's an easy example there. So testing and assessment, again, this is where, we've taken those task demands and really we just want to figure out how our athlete or client measures up to those demands, right? So we want to create appropriate tests and assessments based on those things rather than pulling out just a standard assessment procedure that maybe, we've used for everybody. Like your grandma, your marathon runner, and your person who's looking just for straight hypertrophy and getting jacked probably don't need the same assessment protocols. It's probably not appropriate for all of them, if any of them, to be honest, right? Prioritization of respective demands. So this is where you might have a sport that's super dynamic that has a lot of demands. So we have to figure out what are the top 2 or 3 that we can really focus on that are going to have the biggest return on investment and probably, again, the lowest hanging fruit in a lot of ways where we can get actual progress early on within that person's training based on their timelines and the urgency to whether they have a season coming up or whatever, or a meet or a race or whatever. Repeatability of testing and ongoing assessment, right? So we'll talk about all 3 of these on the next 3 slides. We'll dig into them a little bit and then we'll pretty much be done.
Yep.
So creating appropriate tests and assessments, again, this starts with the consultation intake process. This is where you get into goal selection to better understand where they are. And then the goal selection, identification of task demands, that's where we start building out testing protocols that'll actually see where they line up for things involved with, force production, capacity, skill, coordination, whatever, right? And this is where, for you guys, like I said earlier, like you're gonna have to probably prioritize a lot of ways. And you're gonna kind of have to see like what's the minimal amount of, aptitude this person actually needs to have to start progressing training, and where they should start for, the most possible progress throughout the actual program. So anything there, Matt?
No, this is the one what we're you guys are going to see all that stuff that we do when we release that content this coming weekend.
Yeah, this is going to be a lot of next week
Yeah.
work. And then again, I just kind of said this, but prioritization of task demands, like there are two things that I'm typically looking at there. Highest ROI and lowest hanging fruit. So again, like what are the things that are going to make the biggest impact, and the biggest impact amongst each other or one another, right? Like Matt said, like all of these things we try to identify as like individual characteristics and traits, but they're not, right? It's dynamic. It's a dynamic systems environment where if you increase somebody's strength, their biomechanics and movement might get better, right? If you increase their capacity and their ability to resist fatigue, their biomechanics and movement might get better, as will maybe their force production because of increased motor efficiency, right? So again, figuring out where their true task limiter is and how that affects them downhill is going to be super important as well. And then the low hanging fruit, like there might be some really easy things that you can fix almost immediately with some of this stuff, just because this person doesn't know better or hasn't been taught a specific skill or technique or strategy that maybe like you might be able to like radically improve their performance in the first week of their training simply through teaching them something new. And I think that's something where, again, a lot of trainers will see a movement fault or something of that nature, and they're so scared to let that person like kind of figure it out and learn something that they immediately regress them. Right. And regression is not progress ever, right? That's the antithesis of. They're not going to get better at squatting by going to the floor. I promise you. This, despite what almost every movement system out there tells you. Like find a way to get them actually squatting, use constraints, teach them skills. Sometimes it's just even a verbal cue. Sometimes it's letting them do more of it to get better at it, just like it
Yeah.
would be anything else, right?
Sometimes it's letting them fuck up a couple reps.
Yeah, it's just exposures, right? Sometimes it's just exposures. That's the only teaching tool that you need for some people. And a lot of coaches are very, and including, especially like I was in the past for sure, they're very scared to let their clients fail.
Yeah.
Right. But the reality of it is we probably just need to build a safe environment for them to fail a lot of times. And then that's where the real teaching kind of begins. So
I do have one thing that I'd like to add on this.
no.
Cool, thank you. Appreciate it. But I just want you guys to remember that a lot of this stuff is going to come with almost an inverse fatigue cost, where the thing that has the highest return on investment might be the thing that that person is the most skilled at. So they might be able to tolerate the most volume doing something like that, and you might be able to push a little bit more into that direction. Just like the lowest hanging fruit might be something that, if like Kyle was mentioning, that they're quite bad at, because it's going to be such a novel thing that you're going to be coaching them through and you're going to be teaching them. The fatigue costs and the fatigue demands of that might be significantly higher than something else. So you might want to program that a little bit less volume, just depending on that individual and their training age. Because at that point, if the highest ROI something a thing is something that they're really good at, or it could be like either one, right? So if their lowest hanging fruit is just getting generally stronger and they've been strength training for a long period of time, crush that one and then change their technique gradually with their high ROI stuff, because that might be the most fatiguing thing, especially if they've got a decent base of strength to begin with. Like if I have a guy who deadlifts 800 pounds and is going to switch to sumo deadlifts, he could pull 800 and he could probably sumo pull 800 immediately, but I'm not going to have him do that. I'm going to like stagger his load up a little bit slower so we can more gradually push ourselves into that, so they don't kill themselves with it, because of the amount of force that they can generate into that new thing.
Yeah, Matt deals with a lot of people where it's like you got to apply the brakes more than you got to apply the gas, right? And I
Yes.
think that's something Matt and I've talked about a lot, just in our own just general discussions, where like in his sport, like what holds back a lot of competitors is their like unwillingness to do less.
Yeah.
Like they just have such a capacity and tolerance for work, and they're so strong that they just run themselves into the ground. And it's like you can't like hit your peak, in week 6 of a preparation, right? It's like at that point there you have very little going, you're just grinding, and it's just like being able to actually plan those things out. And this is something we're going to talk about with kind of LTAD down the road. But I get the same thing with my athletes with like weekly mileage and things of that nature, where it's like just because you can run 50 to 75 miles a week doesn't mean you should be all the time. Like there are a lot of things that you do want to undulate, or you do want to linear progress over the course of a prep, that allow for just way more longevity down the road, and a lot more resistance to just general wear and tear sometimes as well, and just general fatigue like in their everyday life. Like again, like having a lower quality of life because your training is going up is also something that we're going to be separating our performance category from our general category. And if you're training non-competitors and general population people, uh
It's gonna
you're
suck. Get over it. That doesn't work well with them.
yeah, if you're negatively impacting their daily quality of life with the training, like these are things that we need to consider, and things that we need to probably figure out better dosing for in a lot of ways. So just stuff we'll definitely expand on as we kind of go through this, but things to consider. And then one of the things we talk about a lot, and that we really you'll see a lot of within the next few weeks as we talk about testing blocks and how those things progress into program design, is the repeatability of testing and ongoing assessment. And the things that that we ask the two questions is the testing trainable, and is the training testable? Are these things that, like, are these protocols that we can just repeat within training sessions, intermittently and down the road within the actual program? That's the easiest way to set up continual testing for a lot of my athletes. Is I find protocols that I'm just looking for improvement in time over time over time. This is something that the very first program that Matt ever wrote for me, as my coach back in the day,
That's what got me a job
5 years ago, Matt, like
5 years
close
ago.
to it, like geez.
5 years ago. It was
Um,
2019.
yeah, what was literally just, it was a 2 mile assault bike time trial that we did once a week and looked for improvement on. And it was an initial test, and then it was built into one of my conditioning days. And it was a weekly test retest.
Yeah.
Right. And after the first few times of, kind of figuring out like my pacing strategies, then it was like, okay, if we're improving, we're improving, we're improving. And for a lot of athletes, like that's probably way more valuable and way more actionable than like trying to give them like continual VO2 testing
Yep.
protocols. Right. Like if I know that I'm constantly improving a 2 mile test, and I've taken it from, 5.5 minutes down to, I think the best I ever did was like 4:10. Like I know that my fitness has improved over the course of that time. And once you hit a wall on that, you expand it out to a 3 mile test, and you work with different pacing strategies.
Yeah.
Right.
Depending on what that individual's goal is. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where it's, that's one of those things where even with that, it's like there's other ways and other things that you can measure. Now we start looking at, jittering a 2 mile test and watching, can we do it at lower heart rate thresholds?
Yeah.
Can we peak lower? Are there ways that we can kind of work through that? So this is where, like in rowing, like if you guys have ever, rowed competitively, everything's built off of 2K. Like that's your cornerstone race, where if your 2K PR is 7 minutes, right? That's a milestone for a lot of people, is getting sub 7. It's a 145, 500 meter pacing. Everything you do from a 500 to 1,000 to a 5K to a 10K is going to be 2K minus X or 2K plus X for your pacing. Like those are what your pacing standards are going to become. So everything involves that. And then as you continuously retest your 2K, everything stays the same from a formula perspective, but all the numbers change. And I think that's something that is actually, like, I use that as a mile test for a lot of my runners. We use a lot of mile pacing, even as we get up into like marathon times, things of that nature, where we want to be able to see like what you're doing as far as like what's your PR mile, And are we going to be doing like a mile plus 30 seconds or a mile plus 45 seconds pacing, or a mile minus 30 seconds or minus 45 seconds, minus a minute pacing, depending on what we're actually running from a duration perspective. But this makes things way easier for a lot of your endurance athletes.
And Dean, this is one of the things that excited me on Wednesday when you said that you do a testing week with your clients, because you're already, so we started there, right? And then we progressed it out to a full month because the testing week was awesome. And then we wanted to start seeing how they would respond to the individual tests that we were doing and turning their tests into training.
Yeah.
So that made everything so much easier because then we became even more dialed in and more tailored for everything that kind of came up because we were able to see which tests they responded the best to, which tests they responded the worst to, and get a really good amount of data to work with that person moving forward. So when you said that on Wednesday, I was like, yes, he's already like 50% of the way there. Adding that in will make it so much better.
Now we're just looking at rate of adaptation.
Yep, exactly. Because if you can see somebody who adapts really, really quick to it, you go, great, this is going to be something that that person does super well. We can jam this.
Yeah. Especially if you're working with a population that's new to a lot of the testing protocols. Like you're going to get things where, they'll do the test once and just suck at it.
Yeah.
Like they're just not going to be good at it because they don't know how to do it. It's not an actual physiological limiter. It's like they just don't know the pacing. They don't know what they're doing. But if you run it two,
Pacing is a
three,
big one.
yeah, two, three, four times,
Yeah.
now by the time they hit week 4 on that 2 mile test or on their like glycolytic endurance test that I have them run or whatever, or their ascending threshold test,
Yeah.
now it's like by the time they hit the 4th round of that, now I have a much truer understanding of what their actual physiological capacity is, as opposed to the first time they've ever done that test.
Yep.
It's like it's very similar to like, the FMS story that I tell people all the time is just like I used to teach the FMS and onboarding every single month for a box gym corporation in New York. I would teach 50 to 200 trainers, depending on what the New York onboarding class looked like, the FMS. And I started having people do it within the class, and I would have, 5 to 6 trainers do it on day 1. And then I would have them do it, same thing, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5. And every single one of them got better from day 1 to day 5, despite doing none of the actual interventions.
Yep.
So again, what was it? It wasn't a movement issue. It was a novelty issue. They got more familiar with the test and what they were supposed to be accomplishing through the testing protocol. And they improved their scores from, maybe an 11 to a 17 over the course of 5 days. Well, now, for me, if I'm a coach, if I was using the FMS or program design, am I going to build a better program off day 1 or day 5? What's going to be the most actionable and progressive program? The one built off day 5, because that's the closest to where they actually are, right? It's the same thing if I do a max wattage test or a 2 mile test or ascending oxidative test. I want to see where they are after a couple exposures, because that's going to give me a better idea of where their actual physiological ability lies. Now I can give them better pacing strategies and better training protocols, because I've got better information to go off of.
Yep. I had that happen to me with a glycolytic test. So we did the 15-second sprint and then the 40% max duration one, Kyle. I had one of my lifters do that. And the first week he did that, he got 22 seconds on his 40% max duration, or 40% max wattage for max duration. And on the third week, he got 88 seconds. So he went from failing the test to being really, really good at passing passing the test with flying colors and not needing to touch it within 2 weeks, just because he was able to understand the pacing and do it a little bit more effectively.
Yeah.
And his numbers went up. So it wasn't like he hit a lower wattage on the test, because I kept the testing portion in there. His wattage went up and his time went up by like 4x. It was impressive.
Yeah, it's just, that's the biggest thing with the 2 mile test is if you've never run one and you don't know what your like RPM or wattage testing it, like pacing is, you either undershoot it or overshoot it. Nobody gets it right the first time they do it. Like that progression arc looks like this. right? Like you will get massive jumps in the first 3 or 4 times somebody does it. And then it really steadies out as you get closer to their actual ceiling output.
Yep.
And that's how a lot of tests actually work. Like novelty plays a huge role within that from a skill performance and from a tactical performance perspective. So that's why we do the testing block typically, because we started like Matt said, Dean, with the 1 week, and we loved it because that was way better than 1 day.
Yeah, it worked so well. We repeated it, and it was like, wow, this is even better.
Oh, they improved again,
Yeah.
right? So it's also great because if your clients don't necessarily know better, you look like the best trainer in the world
Yep.
immediately. So it's also like it's also just a good little uh a way to kind of just build a little buy-in early on in the process, and for them to build a lot of confidence in a lot of ways. I have a client right now who she just entered her 4th week, and she's very gen pop of her first block. And same thing, like we had a glycolytic and endurance test there, and she's improved on it every single time she's done it. And it's a huge confidence boost for her simply because
Yeah.
she's seeing like numbers moving in the right direction. I know that like we haven't built any like real physiological adaptation there, or most likely haven't, but she's seeing numbers go in the right direction, and that benefits both of us. And we're both happy with it. Right. So again, kind of things to think about there. I believe, yeah, this is Q&A slide. Awesome.
Yeah.
So I will stop screen
So,
share.
uh, just before, because we are starting to get some people that are dropping off, obviously, because it's about an hour. Um, Homework for you guys for this weekend. We want you guys to start doing your intakes with your partner, and start outlining what you imagine their individual rate limiters are and all the demands that we kind of went through on these slides today. So if you guys can just get that as a write up, we would love to have you guys post them in the Discord as well, so we can talk about all of them. Because again, we want this to be as applicable as possible with everybody. So we want you guys to basically assess your partner and then go through all that and do a little write up on what you believe the findings are for it for when we start going into it.
Yeah. Yeah. And Dean, again, you might never do a month
Yep.
testing block, and that's totally fine, man. We're literally telling you why we do it and how to do it. And you might not, you guys might not change anything that you do. You might meet in the middle a little bit. You might want to do it like us. Who knows?
Yeah.
We're cool with all of it. If your people are getting better results like we do, like awesome. So it's like, again, that's the beauty of this group is we have a lot of very experienced, really great coaches. And like, again, like we're the first ones to tell anybody there's no one way to do any of this stuff.
Yeah.
In the environment. You also work with a way different population than either me and Matt works with, and I think there's other logistics and constraints on time in a lot of ways that might not allow for 4 weeks of a testing block. And like, that's a viable enough reason not to do one.
Yep.
Right. It's like, you have to work with what's realistic. And this is something, we talk about in all realms, whether it's, biomechanics, movement expression, programming strategies, whatever. Optimal and realistic are not always the same thing. Like most of us, like I acknowledge that there's a better way of doing a lot of the things that I do, but it's not realistic or reasonable within the confines of how I operate remotely. Right. Even I know remote training is not as effective as in-person training, but it's the only way that I would ever even meet the majority of you guys, let alone work with you in any capacity.
Yep.
Right. So again, like that's an example right there of like realistic is sometimes what we have to settle on, from that perspective. It's not the optimal teaching strategy. It's not the optimal training strategy in a lot of ways. So we fully realize that. And I think that's what actually opens up way better discussions because again, like, Dean, in this case, like you talking about your constraints, I think is also valuable to everybody else in this group and vice versa. Like all of you guys have different constraints. We all work in different environments with different demographics. And I think that these discussions are what allow all of us to probably find the best things for ourselves. And that's what we're about. Like that's all we want out of this group is for you guys to find the best things for yourself.
Yeah.
So that's a super valid point. That's all we have as far as the presentation portion. I know some of you guys had to drop off because we were over an hour and you had work to do, which is also totally reasonable. As we talked about on Wednesday. Does anybody have any additional questions just
One of the
based on
reasons why we
what we
like
talked
these
about?
groups better is because you guys are all like busy coaches who have stuff, and it's not like at 2:45. It's like you guys are. Why are you guys still here? Go train somebody.
You guys don't have 3 hours to talk on a weekday.
Yeah.
So anybody have any questions before we let you go for the week?
Yeah, I got one from like one of your earlier slides when you were debating the whole idea of stimulus versus the principles of like say like positioning or biomechanics, right? Because like you'll see both sides. You'll see people who say, all right, we have to have perfect positioning and perfect technique before we can progress. And you also have the other side that says, oh, like stimulus matters more.
Yeah.
How do you like sort of meet it in the middle? Would you guys say?
I think
That's where.
stimulus gives context to all
Yeah.
movement. Like I honestly, after 20 years of training people and being on both sides of it, I don't meet in the middle. But that's
Yeah.
just me.
Yeah. I don't mean the
Like
middle at all.
I know that Diego, if I stand you up and you do a body weight squat right now, and then we put 100 pounds on your back and you do a squat, and 200 pounds on your back and you do a squat, and 300 pounds on your back and you do a squat, they're all going to look different. If we front load you, it's going to look different, right? If I give you an ipsilateral load, it's going to look different. Your position, center of mass, like the load in the center of mass is going to change, and the loading, like that's going to change movement, right? So for me, it's being aware of that, and then also better understanding that it's like, okay, what is the appropriate stimulus to get the pattern and range of motion that I'm looking for, right? Because that's the other side of the coin that I'm now looking on, rather than just saying it's only load and I want to maximize load as much as possible. I'm looking at, okay, if I want to drive a certain range of motion, like if I want to drive a squatty squat, I want to get your ass to your heels. What type of load can I use that will actually benefit and progress that movement? What kind of loading scheme or loading strategy can I use? Right. And that's where for me, it's like that opens up a lot of options rather than trying to close it down to one. I don't want a singular option. And man, and again, this is something like I've been that guy on a gym floor. I've literally been like the corrective rehab coach at every gym I ever worked in my early career,
It's the
because I was
worst.
the only person on the staff that ever understood like biomechanics at any kind of level back in the early 2000s. To age myself, some of you guys were barely born at that point. And I had people doing all kinds of floor shit, and we would get range of motion. I had a goyometer at one point. I'm like out there like measuring shit as they kind of go through. Like I've done it all. I've done the table test. I've done breathing exercises. I've done cars, pails, rails. I've done foam rolling and mobility drills and flossing and all the shit. If it was out there, I have done it. And without fail, everything changes as soon as you stand somebody up and give them any kind of appreciable load.
Yep.
Every single time. So at some time for me, it was acknowledging stimulus matters, and
Yep.
stimulus is probably the number one driver of movement for most people. And I would say the second driver is fatigue.
Yep.
And it's only secondary because it's lagging, not because it's less important. Right. So
An easy example of that one. You ever watch somebody's grip fail on kettlebell swings and watch them go from having the best technique ever, it's like perfect hinging up, to starting to like do like something weird like
doing
this.
everything they
Is
can to
they're
hold on for dear
holding
life.
on to the bell as much as they can. Yeah.
One, it's just, it's like when we look at like any kind of like technique fails for a lot of people, it's just like, okay, like at what load did technique become a fail? And then at what, if it's a capacity based thing, it's like, okay, at what rep did a technique become a fail? Right. If I load you up and we're doing a 3 sets of 5 of squats and I see something I don't want to see on rep 1, it's probably a load issue. If I see something I don't want to see on the 12th total rep, or the second or third rep of the third set, it's probably a fatigue issue. But it's probably not in either case a biomechanics issue. It's a I programmed you wrong issue. I think a lot of coaches also don't want to say I programmed you wrong.
Yep.
In a lot of cases, or I picked a poor exercise selection.
I think part of it's also psychology too. Like real quick, I had a client who her previous trainer only let her goblet squat like 60 pounds because he wanted to like make sure that like technique was perfect, right? So I'm like logically, I'm thinking, okay, well, you haven't got that much hypertrophy, so it's like, all right, we hopped in a leg press at a couple 100 pounds. Now she actually feels like she worked her muscles and she likes it more. Like,
Yeah.
there
Well, and
we
that's
go.
what I said that earlier in the session. Like people goblet squatting just what they can hold with their upper body next to a perfectly good leg press and gyms like drives me insane. Right. It's just like, and I have nothing against goblet squats, but at some point everybody reaches a level of fitness where they're limited by their ability to hold something, not by their lower body. Right. So that's where for me it's like, yes, that's a tool that's great for starting a lot of people, but most people at some point are going to progress out of that. And you just need a different modality, right? And you need something that either allows you to load more weight on it, like a front squat or a Zercher squat, or even a cambered safety bar squat or something of that nature if you really want the front load, or you just hop on a machine and just mash, which also works for a lot of people and is even more low skill and easier to accomplish, right? So I think this is where like those strategies come into play. But yeah, it's movement matters, and we're never going to say movement doesn't matter, but the movement expression you see is always a result of something. Like that's symptomatic of a lot of other variables in a lot of cases. And I feel like if we don't dig deeper into those variables, it's not enough to just like say, point at somebody and say, squat, hingy squat. And then just like label them that thing and put them on the ground and, do what you need to do or whatever. And we didn't even get into like morphology as some of these things. And, just like, basic movement patterns based on not everybody being 5'8" with a symmetrical torso to limb length ratio, right? If you put a 6'5" person next to a 5'6" person and you expect those squats to look the same, good luck.
Yeah.
In this industry, they're not. And that's okay. They shouldn't. It's okay. Find a progressible variation for each one of those people. So yeah, not to get too tangential, but yeah, I hope that answered your question. I feel like we probably took it in more directions than we needed to, but
I find it if a client isn't like a good mover, just put them on machine circuits.
yeah,
I find that's probably the simplest solution.
Should I show them the program I put the shin pop woman on, Matt? Just as well, really quick. We're gonna use it. So my person just started this first week. I'll show you her program as a super gen pop person. And based on her goals, I literally just labeled her testing phase accumulation because I knew she wasn't going to be good at anything. Love this. So she works out 6 days a week. Days 1, 3, and 5 are strength days. 2, 4, and 6 are conditioning days. But this is what her testing block looks like. So very simple warm-up series. Again, put her on the bike just to get her heart rate up a little bit. Day 1, 3 supersets of an upper and lower exercise. I picked peripheral heart for her again because I didn't want a ton of occlusion. I didn't want a ton of acute fatigue. I really just wanted to really drive circulation and more systemic stress for her from that perspective. And I picked all machines because they're easy to use. So we got a leg curl, we got a seated chest press, we got a leg press, we got a lat pull down, we got a leg extension and a seated cable row. We can see how those progress each week, 1 through 4. She's entering week 4 right now. So again, same thing, very simple linear progression scheme for day 1. Remember these 6 exercises. Day 3, we've got incomplete rest blocks. So now we're looking for building glycolytic tolerance. I want occlusion. I'm picking these same 6 exercises, and now I'm working with incomplete rest blocks, which if you're not familiar with that, these are straight sets rather than a superset. She's using the same exact weight she used on day 1, but now instead of 3 sets of 15, we're doing 4 sets of 10 to 12 with 30 seconds rest between the sets. Pump fucking city. I want occlusion. I want glyco work. I want acute tissue fatigue. Cool. You'll see the progression model here. It's all the same cues. 4x10 with 30 seconds, 5x8 with 45 seconds, 5x6 with 1 minute. Progressive overload the whole way. All of it is cued the same weight you did day 1. Day 5, density circuit. Same 6 exercises. Use the same weight as Monday for these. You're going to complete as many reps in 90 seconds as you can, resting as needed, performed in a circuit fashion. Now we're looking at total volume, right? And what we see with this is, from a volume perspective, we have now gone from 45 reps on day 1 of each exercise with a lot of rest to 40 to 48, somewhere in that range, reps with very little rest, to what she got on this. Oh, hold on. That was the wrong day. Ended up with 44 total reps, 42 total reps. So again, now we're just maintaining, kind of working through that rep load. So we look at, I'm going to pick the leg press here from day 1. Keep in mind, she's on week 3 right now. We did 45 reps, about, we'll just call it 130. She did 110 on the first one. And we go to, I don't think she's done day 5 of week 3 yet. So we'll look at day 3. We've progressed that to 40 reps at 210. That's a lot of fucking change in 2.5 weeks.
Yep.
You can get a lot done with some fucking machines, guys. Pick the same 6 exercises so she didn't have to learn anything new. They're all machines, low skill. So she could just go in there and pump out weight. And I gave her 3 different strategies instead of trying to give her 3 different days worth of different exercises. I just changed the application of them. And she loves it. Again, some people need more novelty. Some people want different. She loves it. The
And like
changing of
Dustin
the
said,
strategy is enough for it.
yep. And like Dustin said, you established early on that stimulus takes precedence over variety.
Yeah. And she's absolutely crushing. And, you know, again, for conditioning, we've got some non-cyclic oxidative. This is a bi-weekly set. So for conditioning wise, weeks 1 and 3 are the same, and weeks 2 and 4. So we're actually going through each protocol twice, Dean. So this is another reason I like monthly for my people, is I usually bi-weekly separate their conditioning protocols, so we can get more testing in and get at least 2 exposures of each. And then from there, it's just built into the testing. We have one of the days non-cyclic oxidative, one of the days non-cyclic threshold. And then on Thursdays or day 4, we've got creatine 10-second sprint repeats. And then we've got sprint repeats, ascending load, but we're alternating a GPP circuit with an LICT block. And then on day 6, we've got glycolytic repeats and glycolytic repeats with longer duration. So we're just changing the actual interval length for those 2 things, going from 1 minute to 2 minutes. So that's going to change the intensity level and what her actual max wattage looks like too. So I want to see the difference in those things. But yeah, we do it like new person, man. I'm not letting her mash on machines. Like, doing that is way more effective to me than letting her try to navigate and figure out how to do like walking lunges without falling over.
Yep.
For her first block. Like, you guys saw in 2.5 weeks what the outputs of her leg press looked like. That's only going to get better. Like, that's something that we can just keep improving on. By the time I get to, I'll show you guys next week as a little case study, her day 5 of week 4, and we'll see what the difference is there for total volume. but that's like easy stuff that you can do. Let them just mash machines. If they like, give them low skill, easy stuff to do sometimes is the most effective thing you can do. Not for everybody, but for like this client, definitely. Cool. I don't
Cool.
know what I missed there.
Hey guys, I have a quick question. So going back to intake, this will maybe a little bit basic here, but I'm going back into for a lot of reasons some Gen Pop trading. That hasn't been my focus or what I've been doing. It's almost on the polar opposite end of the spectrum. Um, so just in terms of some advice from you guys or whoever wants to chime in terms of like me creating um like my intake, and then obviously the thought that Kyle you were talking about, kind of making it automated and what can come with that. What would you suggest in terms of kind of putting that to get to actually perfect timing for me in terms of creating this? Is like, what would you suggest in terms of kind of coming up with um what I think is most important, like based on who I would deem my ideal client, or who's kind of finding me as I'm moving back into this portion of my business? Like, what would you recommend in terms of starting from scratch?
Yeah, I mean, from an intake perspective, especially with Gen Pop, I obviously want to know goal selection, and I realize that for most of those people, it's going to be body composition, weight changes, and then like general strength changes with some health markers, typically, right? That's you have a larger contributor of like medical issues there with like high blood pressure, resting heart rate, whatever thing, like positions for metabolic and cardiac disease, things of that nature, just from being a more sedentary population than your athletes. Unless they're Matt's athletes, they probably rank just as high in some of those ranges. A little dig there.
That's why I said it earlier.
Yeah, but then I also want to know, with them again, same thing. Like I want to know training frequency and training availability. That's probably number two, because that's going to be the next biggest indicator on what their actual program looks like. Writing a 2-day program versus writing a 4-day program versus writing a 6-day program are very different,
Right.
as far as like what I need to prioritize. Like you write a 6-day program, you can fit anything in there. You can program anything literally in 6 days. But if I'm doing a 2-day versus a 4-day, like now I have to prioritize, and I might even make it like a bi-weekly program. And this is stuff we're definitely going to talk about over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And then the other side of it is I like lifestyle stress is going to be probably my third biggest marker, is like, again, just understanding, like, are they in a relationship? Are they married? Do they have kids? What's their job situation look like? What are their social situations look like? Because these are all things that are going to greatly impact their ability to train and what they get out of training in a lot of ways, and how they prioritize training in their lives. And from there, it's like, I'm probably, if I'm looking to market a lot of this stuff, like I'm going to lean pretty heavy into being a coach that presents themselves as understanding some lifestyle limitations and being super efficient with the training process to maximize their time.
Yep.
Because that's
also going to ask about.
It's probably gonna be a limitation of sorts that pops up. Like that's one of the bigger things. Like that's one of the biggest like obstacles that you're gonna get in the intake process, even more so than I don't have the money, is I don't have the time.
Yeah.
Is what you're gonna hear a lot.
I'm also going to want to look into that person's support system, and see if I'm going to have to be their entire support system for getting them to where they want to go, or if they have people outside of the gym that are supporting them on their path to going to where they are, or if we're going to be dealing with some unconscious sabotage from people outside of the gym.
Sometimes,
I mean, it seems like the population that's already kind of shown up, as I've kind of put it out there, is kind of guys in their, let's say, late 30s to mid 50s, married, young kids, and this stuff they're already talking about is job and drinking, and I have to drink for work. I'm out late. I have to do all this. My wife either isn't on board or is on board. Like, so you guys kind of hit on a bunch of stuff that I feel like they've already, the few guys that I just got going recently already have kind of tapped into.
Yeah. And I think efficiency making the most of your time is a big one. And then it's funny. It's like we talk about a lot when I have people with limited time, and I mentioned this, I think, on the first call. We'll talk about it more as we go. But if we're looking at like that inverse relationship between intensity and volume, right? And intensity goes up, volume kind of inherently goes down, and vice versa. So if you look at it on an XY, you've got a big X, right? Literally on what that kind of looks like if you're looking at it linearly. If I'm looking at systemic stress profiles for low, moderate, and high stim, that actually goes in like a bell curve typically over that X, where that moderate stem work, where you're working through more glycolytic based work from a conditioning perspective and more like hypertrophy, mechanical hypertrophy, specifically like myofibril work, probably from a hypertrophy perspective, is actually the most systemic stress you can dump on somebody. So, and this, Valerie's actually kind of a good example of this. Is my goal with her in limited training, 3 strength sessions a week, would be similar to what you're doing with somebody with 2 strength sessions a week, or maybe 3. Is my goal is to dump as much stress into those 3 hours as I possibly can, because I need to make them as metabolically as efficient as possible. Because again, that
Right.
highest systemic stress is that also is the highest adaptation potential for that person, right? When I start looking at just like how I'm dosing those things out. So I end up doing a lot of just like myofibril work. Like it's basically an accumulation phase for those types of clients, where I just will kind of rotate through different strategies, right? And my goal is just, again, like submaximal strength and power in a lot of like myofibril hypertrophy stuff with their mains, and then a lot of like sarcoplasmic work just to keep them feeling healthy and getting a good pump in with their accessories. And then if they do want to get into something where they're like, hey, I want to be able to like run and jump and do some of these things, then I can slowly start dosing that stuff in later. But a lot of it ends up almost being like kind of body composition based stuff too, for a lot of these types of men and women, where again, it's like the beauty of like hypertrophy based work is like, yeah, it's like it's great to like look good and you want the aesthetics of it, but you're also probably increasing people's like circulation efficiency. So again, it's not like necessarily cardiorespiratory, but it is very
Right.
cardiovascular when you start looking at increased mitochondrial and like capillary density within those tissues, and the ability to move blood in and out of those tissues along with other nutrients. So it's like these things are also going to contribute to those people's health, and some of those other maybe biometrics that might be a little skewed later on too. So that's what the training for me usually looks like, unless they specifically tell me they want something different.
Yeah. One of the things you might also
Yeah, because it's not like
go for it.
ahead, Matt.
You go for it. You go first.
Yeah, well, I was just gonna say, like, it's a good point too, because it's not like, I would love to be doing a lot of oxidative work, aerobic capacity work, stuff like that, but these guys are not going to be, some of these guys these are not guys that can sit on a bike for fucking,
Yeah,
an hour to get their zone 2 work in, 5 days a week, and then train on top of it, and then do, so it's got to be kind of bang for the buck here.
yeah.
If you have the space, you might also want to start looking into offering some like smaller or semi-private classes as well, because then you can start building in your own support system within the group of people that you're working with.
Good community with that as well. Like change the environment and the offering a little bit also if you're in person with these guys, and
especially if that's the thing that you're getting the most frequent feedback on, is that people are like, it's fucking me by myself and I got to do this. Get 5 of them together and do it.
Yeah, and I mean, the benefit for you is, if you're working on the hour, one guy paying you $100 an hour versus 3 guys all paying you $60 an hour ends up being a
right
deal for you from an efficiency, especially if they're all going to be training kind of the same, from that perspective. But yeah, on the conditioning side of things, it's funny. I was actually talking on a podcast about this with a guy yesterday. For my clients like that with limited time, I actually don't do any zone 2 work. I do a lot of threshold work because I can get a much bigger bang for buck, and I can get way more from like a VO2 adaptation and just from like a general systemic adaptation. And it's way more time efficient. So I would rather give that person, if I have to do it in session and that's desired, like 3-minute blocks at like 85 to 90% heart rate, than like 1 45-minute block at 75% heart rate.
Right.
Like I'm going to do the thing that's going to give the biggest bang for buck. And then maybe down the road, I can get by and that they'll do some of those other things for themselves. And I'm just going to say, hey, when you're walking your dog, go on a longer route and slowly just increase like some of the neat stuff, get in more steps, like play with your kids in the driveway more, like go shoot hoops or whatever. And try to just encourage more daily movement for some of that, like more baseline general stuff for them.
Yeah. And if you guys are doing classes, do it like pump classes,
Dude,
strength
like,
classes.
So I think somebody mentioned, I think Diego mentioned Pat in the chat, like, dude, 30-30 circuits, just let him do pump work and circuits, like old school mass style on some of this stuff, and just like let him work, give him like 5 or 6 exercises and have him cycle through like full body circuits, and they'll be good to go on stuff like that. Just like things like that work really well for those types of groups.
Cool.
But yeah, we'll talk a lot. Yeah, as we get into the program design, like we'll talk a lot about just like different strategies and different things, and for a lot of different populations and training frequencies and whatnot. And I think that's where this will get really fun. Just more input for more and more people. I think is going to be really, really useful for everybody.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well,
that's all we got, guys.
Yeah, we'll let you go on your Friday. Thanks for popping in on the random call,
the short notice call. Yeah,
I'm glad we got everything.
There are 2 calls every week moving forward.
Yeah,
this is the only one that we didn't have 2 scheduled for, just so you guys are aware.
Yeah, so the Friday calls will be a more regular frequency, especially when you guys look at the calendar on the website. You'll see that as well. So we'll be able to kind of get through and get in on all of these. But I will be releasing the modules for next week. Sunday night, so you guys can all look at it before the call as well. So we're gonna get all. And
I will be reposting your homework in the case study section in the Discord.
Yeah, and now that we actually recorded this video, we'll have that up today too. So
yes,
Dean, hopefully I don't have to desperately message you about this.
Dean, help!
Dean, did you get the video? But yeah, thanks guys. We appreciate you guys popping on.
Enjoy your weekend.
Yeah, we'll see you on the Discord. Have a great rest of the day and have a great weekend.